morning, welcome, and thank you for having me here. And it's magnificent to be here with you today. I live in Cape Town. It's still winter in Cape Town. I think you don't realize what your climate is like here. I mean, it's one of the many things we take for granted in South Africa is the weather that we have. But it really, compared to Cape Town is just raining. We had floods. It's messy at the moment. Look, it'll get better at some stage. But when trying to decide what to say in this presentation, can you all hear properly at the back there? It's good. We're trying to decide what to say. I thought to myself, okay, how do I feel? I thought, I feel better than I did about 3 months ago. 3 months ago, end of May, beginning of June, it was tough. And that's why I've called this the darkest hour. They say the darkest hour comes before dawn. And I think what we went through as a country at the end of May, beginning of June, was our darkest hour. I think what we're going through as a country now is our darkest hour. And what I'm going to show you today is that I think things can get better. Okay. Somebody came up to me yesterday at a presentation in Pretoria. She's all property. She says, I can't get people to invest. They don't want to invest in Pretoria. I said, just ask them if they believe things could be run properly. Because if they can, things can improve quite quickly. I thought to myself, I'm also very glad it's not 21 months ago. 21 months ago, well, not 18 months ago, the world was about to start going up. Inflation was going up. Interest rates were going to go like that. When interest rates go like that, you just know the next 3-4 years are going to be tough. We're in the middle of it now. Interest rates are up here. They're not going to come down in a hurry, but they are going to come down. They're not going to stay at 23-year highs. And when they start coming down, you are going to start feeling better. So let's get on with the presentation. I'm going to start off just by showing you a video, and then we'll show you a video on what has been going on, and then we'll go into the presentation.
Strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal.
Well, I think you could say that he was stone-faced.
I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
It's going to make a gigantic difference in this campaign.
Erupting in cities across France. Protesters still very unhappy about French President Emmanuel Macron's decision to raise France's retirement age from 62 to 64.
For months, there have been delays and cancellations.
God save the king! God save the king!
There is no mistaking this moment. King Charles III crowned in a sumptuous, seamless ceremony in the soaring nave of Westminster Abbey, a fusion of medieval and modern.
I come not to be served, but to serve.
Rolling blackouts across the country almost on a daily basis.
Food prices have risen rapidly in the last year. That's leading to concerns over low levels of nutrition.
We are confident that weapons were loaded onto that vessel, and I would bet my life on the accuracy of that assertion.
We put focal on the chip.
South Africa says that Russian President Vladimir Putin will not be attending next month's BRICS summit in Johannesburg.
Right, but before we get on to South Africa, I'm going to look at what is going on around the world. And we're going to look at the countries that we trade with. Who are our big trading partners? Because if they're not doing well, they're not going to buy our exports. It's not good for us. So, the bottom line, if you look at the world as a whole, is that the gap is getting bigger. So the Americans are doing okay, and the rest not really. The Europeans are slowing fast. They're probably going to have a recession. I'm going to come to that. The good news is inflation is coming down, but it's coming down too slowly. Because of that, they're going to keep interest rates higher for longer and longer and longer. It was meant to be coming down in March next year. Now they're saying June, and it could even go later than that. The problem with that is only when interest rates start coming down, or only when markets can see a date that interest rates are going to come down in America, only then will the dollar soften a bit. Only then will it start feeling a bit better. So it's delaying what's known as a risk-on environment. In life, if anything is scary for foreign investors, they pull all their money home, back to America. Anything that's scary, even if the problem is in America, like it was with the global financial collapse in 2008, they still pull money out of emerging markets back to America. When they feel safe, they take on more risk, and they come to emerging markets like South Africa. So that's what we want. That's why we want interest rates coming down. China's recovery has been disappointing. Oil remains a risk. If oil goes $100 or above, this whole game changes. Then inflation is staying higher for longer. Interest rates could even go up. The whole thing gets messy. But oil shouldn't go up much more. That's why it's coming down now, because the world is not demanding too much oil. Only America's doing well. Europe's not doing well. Britain's flat on its back. Asia's not doing well. So oil shouldn't be too much of a problem. Okay, let's go around the world and look at the different countries. So here are the Americans. Look on the right there. Can you see why I'm glad it's not 18 months ago? 18 months ago, that roller coaster was starting to go like this. Do not underestimate what that does to stock markets, to the economy, to jobs, not just in America, but around the world. Because as soon as the Americans start putting up interest rates, the whole world follows. The good news is, it's working. Their inflation is under control. It's coming down nicely. They talk about a resilient economy, a resilient consumer in America. Is it a resilient consumer, or is it a consumer living beyond their means? I think it's the latter. The American public owe over $1 trillion on their credit cards. Dollars. Okay. I think this is an example. This is a Taylor Swift concert. It could be a Beyonce concert. They're both crossing America at the moment, selling within minutes. As soon as the tickets go on sale, within minutes, the whole stadium like that is sold out at a minimum price of $1,000 per ticket. Quite something. That, to me, is probably a consumer living beyond their means. Okay, so America's okay economically. That's good news because they're the biggest economy in the world. They buy a lot of our goods. So that's good news. Politically, they're in a bit of a mess at the moment. Okay, so they've got elections in November next year. They've got elections. Europeans have got elections. The British have got elections. We've got elections. I'm going to touch on each of those. Let's look at the Americans first. On the left, you can see who have put up their hands from a Democratic perspective. And I think it's safe to say Biden will take that. On the right, you can see who, from a Republican perspective, has put up their hands. Now, it doesn't matter how many Republicans put up their hands for the position, Trump is probably going to take it. This shows you each month Republican support, what percentage is for the various candidates. So you can see on the right there, end of July, 54% of Republicans want Trump back. At the end of August, that number had gone up to 58. Interesting to see his strategy. He ignores the TV debate. So when all the other Republican candidates get together for the TV debates and slate each other, He doesn't attend those, but he does go to court. He didn't need to be in court on Monday, but he was there. He's using it to feed the conspiracy narrative. He's got a lot of court cases still to get through, but it doesn't seem to affect his support at all. No sooner had he had his mugshot taken in Georgia and it was published than you saw it on cups, on T-shirts, on everything. He uses it for marketing. So I think it's safe to say that in November next year, you will see two octogenarians, Trump will be 79, Biden 81, taking each other on for what must be one of the most stressful jobs on the planet. I mean, but look, there's a positive in there somewhere. It says something about the way we're aging. If you can consider at the age of 81 taking on what is not an easy job, that's why you need a good financial advisor, because you've got to make sure you've got money left at that stage. I mean, Biden will be 85 when he finishes running the world. This has massive implications, not just for America, but for us as well, for everybody, because Trump has got very different views on climate change. He doesn't really back it. He's supported by the oil and gas money, so he's not big on climate change. He'll probably pull America out of all of the climate change agreements. He's also has very different views on the war in Ukraine. He doesn't believe they should be funding it. He's closer to Vladimir Putin. Also, President Trump could conceivably pardon himself if convicted. So he has a massive incentive to win. And I think you're going to see that coming through in the aggression of the campaign. Okay, Europe, 23-year highs for their interest rates. Their problem is that their inflation is more than double. So America's inflation is fine. Europe's inflation is more than double where the central bank would like it, and they're going to get it back to 2%. So their interest rate's higher for longer. Their problem is that their growth is falling apart. Germany's already in recession. Holland heading that way. A lot of them slowing a lot. Now, any of you that have been to Europe over the last 3, 4, 5 months will remember three things. Very crowded, very expensive, very hot. But it wasn't just Europe that was hot. July was the hottest month for the entire planet. The hottest July ever. September, that finished 2-3 days ago, was the hottest September ever for the planet. And they think 2023 is going to be the hottest year ever for the planet. So something is happening. The United Nations head, he said that the era of global boiling has arrived. He said global warming is over. What does global boiling mean? It means longer periods of extreme weather. Droughts, flooding, fires. You cannot turn on the television without 10 to 15 minutes being allocated to wildfires, floods, droughts somewhere in the world. And the problem is we're not fixing the problem. Why aren't we fixing the problem? Because to fix it requires sacrifices. And human beings don't like sacrifices, and human beings are voters. So governments go where human beings want to go. So you're already seeing all the 2050 net zero targets that we heard so much about a couple of years coming under pressure. There's Rishi Sunak in Britain last week, marching back on their 2050 commitments. And I'm telling you right now, if Trump wins next year in November, the Americans are going to cancel their 2050 commitments as well. One of the problems in terms of emissions that the Europeans have is it is now more expensive to catch a train than a plane. It's much nicer catching a train, and you pay for it now. If you look on the left there, Britain and Spain, it's 4 times more expensive to catch a train than a plane. And the thing is, often you get there, and the experience you were looking for isn't what you expected because it's become too crowded. Social media, Instagram, feeds the whole world's tourists into about 10 to 20 tourist destinations. So you go to Paris hoping to see that picture, hoping to get that photograph, and all you actually get in the end is that. You go to Italy because you've seen this fountain in movies, in about 100 movies. You decide you want to get a picture of you sitting next to it, but that's what happens. And I think we've got a massive opportunity. People always say, how do we get the economy going? Tourism's one good place to start. We don't have to put any money in. We've got all the infrastructure. We've got the hotels. We've got fabulous people. They can go to wine farms. They can go to big 5 game reserves. They can go to mountains. They can do whatever they want. And for every 8 foreign tourists, 1 permanent job is created. We have to start there. Okay, back to reality. What's happening in the war? Now, the war is important because it is a risk event. It makes people nervous. If they were to stop fighting tomorrow, it would be beneficial for emerging markets, beneficial for South Africa, simply because it creates an unpleasant risk event. So, what is happening? It's gone on longer than anyone expected. It was meant to last a week or two. They were going to go and save Ukraine, get out. There'd be much excitement. Someone would make a movie. It hasn't worked out like that. Nobody's enjoying it. The Ukrainians certainly aren't enjoying it. The Russians aren't enjoying it. There's pushback on Putin in Moscow. Both sides will need to give a bit if we're going to get out of this thing. There's also a lot of pressure from the West on Ukraine because Western taxpayers are getting tired of paying for this thing. It's very expensive. It's going on much longer than anyone expected. And also Western leaders are very worried about what happens if Trump wins. Zelensky must be having sleepless nights about that. You saw Biden on Monday, the Republicans blocked another spending bill for Ukraine. On Tuesday, Biden personally phoned all the European leaders. He phoned the head of NATO. He phoned the head of the European Commission to promise them that America will keep funding this war. He said, it's just politics, don't worry, we'll sort it out. Because the Americans are funding about 70% of this war. If they stop, Europe's on their own. And Vladimir knows that. Zelensky's got a peace plan. He wants his troops back, he wants his land back, and he wants security that this isn't going to happen again. Not unreasonable requests, but Vladimir's not going to give that. He wants to keep the land that he's gained, and he's probably going to want to wait for American elections next year. Okay, so unfortunately no solution with the war, but if you read one day in the paper that they've stopped fighting, it'll be good. Okay, let's turn to Britain. They also buy a lot of our products. That's what they've been through from the interest rate cycle. I mean, can you imagine if you've got a mortgage? That's 18 months ago, and you're now sitting up at the top. And in places like London, there are a lot of people that have got a problem because everybody bought London property because it was such an obvious investment. It only went up. It was seemingly the investment that can go and only go up. You could borrow money at around 1%. People took out, they bought 3 or 4 flats, 3 or 4 mortgages, and it was happy days. You just made money. And then suddenly it went from under 1% to 6% that you're paying on the mortgage. And then last year, property prices fell by 5%, and they're going to fall another 5% this year, so people are offloading. It's a problem. So the cost of living crisis in the UK is very real. Interest rates at a 15-year high. Their inflation is 3 times where the Bank of England would like it. And that's a big problem. And their economic growth is flat. So they're worried that they're going to push interest rates too high. The Bank of England. There's the governor of the Bank of England. This is a man that's not going to stop until he gets inflation down to 2%, even if it upsets their growth and pushes them into recession. Another problem you've got if you go to somewhere like London, if you don't get hit by a strike at the airport, you will get hit by a strike on the tubes when you try and get from the airport to your hotel. If the tubes don't get you, the railways will, and if they don't get you, then either the nurses, the doctors, the teachers, somebody is going to affect you. Because what you can see from this on the right-hand side is that striking activity in the UK at 30-year highs, back to the same levels as Margaret Thatcher. So that's not good for their economy. This is also interesting. This is The Economist magazine saying that for the first time since Brexit, since they left Europe, polls are coming back now saying that more Brits believe it was a mistake to leave the European Union than a good thing. And I think Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, says next year he's going to campaign on the basis of rewriting the Brexit deal, and I think they might still have another referendum. Okay, turning to China quickly. All that talk when China came out of COVID about them rebounding, that it was going to be so exciting, long forgotten. Their property market's still in trouble. Their municipalities are carrying too much debt. Consumption is falling. So their growth numbers have been scaled back from 6% to 5% to 4.4% next year. That's not enough. We need them back at 6%. They're trying to stimulate. Hopefully they get it right. If the world's second largest economy isn't firing, it affects emerging markets like South Africa. This is interesting. China are going to limit kids' screen time. So, children to 16 to 18 years old are going to have 2 hours of screen time a day. Internet ban for all children between the ages of between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. If you're 8 to 16 years old, you get 1 hour per day. If you're under the age of 8, you get 8 minutes per day. Quite something. I mean, it's not a bad idea, is it? My audiences always nod and go, yes, that's a good idea. I mean, implementation would probably be hard. The Chinese have got another problem. Traditionally, you just think of the Chinese population as just expanding. It's actually not. They peaked last year. They went down by 850,000 people last year, and they're going to keep declining. India took over this year as the world's most populous nation. India will continue to grow until 2050. The world will continue to grow until 2080, and then at 10.4 billion, the world population will start coming down quite significantly. By 2050, Nigeria will be bigger than America. By 2080, Pakistan will be bigger than America. Okay, back in South Africa, there's a Springbok. What can I tell you? Okay, I wanted to have a look at what made us all so upset at the end of May, beginning of June. Because even I, who am inherently optimistic, struggled at the end of May, beginning of June. I thought to myself, when we were getting accused by the Americans of supplying the Russians with weapons, I thought, I'm not sure we're going to be able to hold this thing together. And I think a lot of people felt the same. I think a lot of you thought, oh, time to go. Okay, so in May, we were already unhappy. Why were we unhappy? Sticky inflation, it was coming down, but very slowly. We had very high interest rates, and they weren't coming down, and our economic growth was flat. So we were already unhappy, but we can't complain about that because it's tough economic times. We've got to distinguish between what is our fault as a country and what is natural economic cycle. Because natural economic cycle happens. It's like the weather. You can't affect it. And we all know that tough economic times, you just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually it feels a bit better. And the whole world, by the way, was feeling this. The whole world. But the problem is then at the end of May, a whole lot of self-induced, self-created problems, own goals if you want, hit us at the same time. So let me take you through those. Do you remember at the end of May, suddenly load shedding was at level 6 every day for about 2-3 weeks. And then suddenly in the press, you started seeing leaked schedules saying that there was not only that 6 wasn't the most, that it could go 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And we're going into winter, so people started to panic. They thought that's what winter's going to be like. There were also fears of a grid collapse, that the whole system would go down and it would take 2 weeks to reboot. There was political uncertainty. It looked as though President Ramaphosa had lost interest in the job. It looked as though we were told Paul Mashatile was coming next, President Mashatile. The problem is people didn't know a lot about Paul Mashatile. The Russian relationship was worrying. It certainly didn't look neutral. And then the Lady R debacle happened. We got accused of supplying the Russians with weapons, and the foreign investors said enough is enough, and they dumped the rand. Inflation spiked, interest rates went higher, and the mood dropped to the lowest level in a very long time. But it feels better now. So let me just take us through and let's look at those again. So we didn't have extreme load shedding throughout winter. In fact, June was one of the lowest load shedding months. We got through winter. There wasn't a grid collapse. By the way, this last winter was the biggest risk. Next winter will be better because some of the capacity will come online. The following winter, it'll be largely out of your way. It won't be a problem like that anymore. So we got through the winter. That's very important. Look, I'm not being naive. I am aware that we've got a 3 billion rand a month diesel habit that we're going to have to kick at some stage. Paul Mashatile, will he be president? I don't know. Ramaphosa certainly got wind in his sails again after the BRICS conference. I'm going to come to that in a moment. People are getting to know Paul Mashatile. He seems to be, he's very engaging with business. He seems to be doing stuff behind the scenes, but at this stage, difficult to form an opinion. The Russian relationship, I'm going to come to in a moment because that got us very worked up, and suddenly we found ourselves being ostracized on the global stage, so I'm going to spend a bit of time on that. The Lady R debacle, I'm going to come to that as well. But essentially, the Russian relationship, I would argue, is basically sorted now, and the Lady R issue is also sorted. But I'm going to discuss those in more detail. Inflation is coming down. Interest rates are going to come down first quarter of next year. So basically, all the things that got us so upset at the end of May, beginning of June, have either evaporated or are going to improve over the next year or two. So let's look at the Russia relationship first. Now, I think government thought that they could say that we were neutral on the war, but then still behind the scenes cozy up to Vladimir Putin. You can't really do that because the people watching us are not stupid. This is The Economist. You can see they've painted us pink. Pink means Russia leaning. Okay. Now, if the economists think that you're Russia-leaning, and London's Financial Times thinks you're Russia-leaning, then I'm afraid the people that are going to put sanctions on this country, or the people that invest in this country, are largely Western investors, and they read those. They're also going to think we're Russia-leaning. Okay. And then we got this drip feed of stuff like this. What are our generals doing in Moscow? What combat are we getting ready for? Is there something they know that we don't? And to be honest, I think the Russians have got their hands full without having to give us combat-ready tips. So it was a drip feed of that going on. The Lady R thing, I mean, what was that? You can't blame people for being suspicious. A boat arrives in the middle of the night, a Russian boat, Nochal. It turns off its transponder before it comes in. Something happens, okay? It leaves a few hours later, at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, even the Simonstown residents noticed. Do you know what it takes to wake the Simonstown residents up? Okay, they noticed. Did they really think the Americans weren't going to notice? Anyway, the 6-week classified committee investigation, and they found that weapons were loaded off the vessel, not onto the vessel, and apparently that makes a difference. And apparently the Americans are happy with that, so let's leave it at that. Okay, let's leave it at that, and let's forget about all of this, but it looks like it's sorted, which is good news, because we don't want to upset the Americans. They're our second biggest trading partners after China. And they do a lot of stuff for us. They let us trade our goods, sell our goods in America without adding a tariff onto it. That is huge. Those tariffs are 20 to 30%. It makes your goods a lot more competitive. They give a lot of work, a lot of aid. They give us $750 million a year for AIDS. You know, all of that stuff would stop immediately if they wanted to. I think we're okay with a goer. You've got the conference happening here next month because I think the Americans are feeling insecure on the continent versus China. So they need us as well. I don't think they'll kick us out of a goer further into the arms of BRICS, but that doesn't mean we can behave badly. I think, and this is where I think it changed 3 months ago. I think government suddenly got a fright when they saw that we could lose 30% of our exports overnight. 20% America, 10% Europe. Overnight. Now understand, in South Africa, jobs are very important. If you create jobs, you alleviate a whole lot of problems. If you destroy jobs, a whole lot of problems exaggerate. Unemployment, poverty, etc., crime. So we cannot do anything to jeopardize jobs. Load shedding was devastating for jobs. If we'd lost 30% of our exports overnight because of rubbish like this, it would have been devastating for the economy. So finally, government stressing neutrality. The last 2-3 months have been much more on message. Before that, everybody seemed to be allowed to bash the West if they want to. They're finally supporting rather than sabotaging Western relationships, which is very important because you don't have to choose between the West and the rest. You can be friends with both sides and you can trade with both sides, and that's what we have to do. The BRICS summit went well, as well as it could go. It could have gone horribly wrong. The whole world's media was focused on us. If we used it as a Western bashing exercise, it would have been very embarrassing. Vladimir Putin didn't come. Thank heavens he didn't come. That would have set up a whole lot of diplomatic hurdles, which we would have knocked over. The president was very impressive there. He's good at that stuff. He's very good with world leaders. 6 new members, getting the petro economies on board would be a good idea, but it's not going to help us with the grey listing if we're going to start getting closer to Russia and Iran. We have a risk of being played by China and Russia, just like we get accused of being played by the West. We've got to make sure that we're independent in the middle, but properly independent. Also interesting, the Chinese leader came to us. He snubbed the G20. That's very important. Okay, so the Russian relationship, I think, is much better than it was 3 months ago. I think it's settled. You would have seen a day or two ago in the newspapers, the Americans and the South Africans, lots of hugging going on, lots of special relationship, lots of the relationship is better than it has been before. So I think that's all sorted. Let's quickly just touch on a couple of the other things that have been devastating us at the moment. The first is rail and ports, okay? Boring, I know it sounds, but it's important that we discuss this. First of all, rail. So this is the chief executive of SAPI. He says they move a lot of product from Mpumalanga down to the coast, but they take it to Joburg, and from there they've got to put it on the roads because the railways don't work. Not acceptable. Transit's inefficiencies costing us R1 billion a day. On the right there, you can see the amount of trucks on our road. And you can see by the middle of this year, there were more trucks on our road than there were the whole of last year. And last year, there were nearly double as many as the year before. And that's not good. Trucks cost a lot more. They crash. The miners would have exported 150 billion rand more. We could have taxed that. If we taxed that, we probably wouldn't have the hole in our tax revenue that we're going to have this year. Our growth this year is going to be 0.5%. That's not bad. I mean, it's not great, but, relatively it's okay. But it would have been 5.4% if the railways and the electricity were working. But, and this is the big but, and this is where things change. We've gotten to the point where business is now getting involved. Assets are being partially privatized, and this is the most important thing of the presentation. Because our economy has been in such trouble over the last 2 years, has forced government to make some hard decisions. And those hard decisions are letting business get involved and privatizing or partially privatizing state assets. So, for instance, and if we can get to the end of this crisis with partially privatized, functioning state-owned enterprises, it'll almost have been worth it. So the ports are already being done. Durban's done. Durban's been outsourced already. Biggest port in the country, biggest port on the continent. The other ones are all up for tender at the moment. The railways are looking for private partners. Okay, so that's happening as well. This wasn't possible 5 years ago. When Ramaphosa came in 5 years ago and started speaking about privatization of state assets, the debate was closed down very quickly. How did we get here? Corruption and putting the wrong people in the jobs. Simple as that. But I think both of those are very much in the spotlight in the moment, and I think you're going to see less of that going forward. SAA almost done. For how long has that been draining taxpayers' money? Electricity privatization already underway. There is so much money going into fixing the problems with electricity in this country that it is going to start bearing fruit quite soon. There are hurdles. You will hear that we don't have enough grid capacity, but apparently we've got sufficient grid capacity to significantly improve us from where we are at the moment. So from the middle of next year, you're going to start feeling a bit better about load shedding, and from 2025, things should improve quite substantially. By a bizarre twist of irony, we are ahead of our 2025 climate emission goals. Not because we did anything clever, because power plant breakdowns are reducing industrial activity. It's a result. We'll take it, but it's certainly not a victory. You're going to hear a lot of talk about how we don't have any money. We do have money. We've just got to spend it correctly. Why? Because we're not going to get the 250 billion rand from commodities that we got over the last couple of years. That got us through COVID. That helped with the social grant, etc. We're not getting it this year. The public servants' wage increase, 7.5%, that wasn't budgeted for in February. That's 37 billion. We're going to have to find money for that. So we're probably going to be short 50, 60 billion, somewhere around there. But what's quite interesting is see the functioning of an independent treasury. We have an excellent independent treasury, reserve bank. Be thankful for those things. Independent judiciary, independent free press. Be thankful for all of that. That's what separates us from other emerging markets. What's interesting at the moment is you've got the ANC on the one hand saying, obviously we're going to spend money because there's an election year next year and they want to do things that are going to bring in votes. And you've got Treasury saying, no, you don't have the money. So they're fighting. Because remember, it's Treasury that holds the keys to the bank account. Remember when Zuma was in power? That's why he wanted to get rid of Pravin Gordhan, because Pravin Gordhan wouldn't give him the keys. And Treasury is saying to him, you've got to cut spending. So there's actually a lot of talk within government about actually cutting spending because there is so much waste. Will it actually happen? I don't know. There's talk about increasing borrowing, but we can't increase borrowing too much. We have already borrowed a lot, and the amount that we pay in terms of interest each year is high. You could tax people more, but you can't keep taxing and taxing and taxing. So I think you probably get a mix of that, but we have to grow the economy. We have to get jobs going and create new taxpayers. This, I think, sums it up nicely. You have our very sensible finance minister saying to the president, you've got to cut. We have 30 ministers. 32 deputy ministers, you can start there, fold some of those, consolidate some of those. There's our inflation. This is the good news. Firmly within where the Reserve Bank wants it. Rasetsa Kganyaga, one of the top central bank governors in the world. So we're okay. This sounds boring, but it's also very important. Business are getting involved with helping government. Now, normally when you hear that, your eyes glaze over because it hasn't worked before. But this time, 125 of the country's top chief executives have committed to helping fix three things: energy, logistics, crime and corruption. I've discussed the first one, Eskom. Energy is going to get better in the next year and a half. The ports, the rail. So effectively what's going to happen in this country is that the miners, who are the big consumers of electricity, are going to make their own electricity. They're going to pull the stuff out of the ground. They're going to put it onto their own railways, which will take it down to the ports, which would have been privatized, and the system will work. So business are going to provide experts and resources that only business can afford. They're going to help them go after the NPA state capture kingpins, because we have to go after those guys successfully. At the moment, the NPA are trying to do it. The cleanup is happening, just very slow because they're limited resources. Business are going to come in with the necessary funding to sort that out. There are people that say you're wasting your time. They're going to be reluctant, dysfunctional officials. They're not going to work with business. But as one of the business leaders said, we don't have a choice. We have to do it. We cannot sit and wait for political change because we don't know what the state of the economy or our business will be by then. And progress is being made. They're getting involved in optimizing the diesel supply to the power stations. That's very important. They're passing legislation, cutting red tape to make sure that we get the plants working again, that we expand the grid access, and that we get commodities exported. They're also boosting policing, right down to delivery, making sure that the 10111 call center has actually got someone there that answers the phone when you phone. And every 6 to 12 months, they're going to report back. So I think that is going to make a difference. What's happening next year in the elections? I think the ANC will still be the biggest party at the end of the year. If they get over 50%, and the analysts are putting ANC support somewhere between 45 and 52%. If they get over 50%, no coalitions. If they get 45 to 50%, they'll go with one of the many smaller parties. The chances of them needing a DA or EFF coalition, unlikely. The EFF coalition would be the worst case scenario. That, according to the analysts, is the least likely scenario as well. The multi-party coalition gets very interesting at a regional level. I'm not sure the numbers nationally can get there, but certainly at a regional level it gets interesting. But the thing is, we have to provide certainty, policy certainty going forward. Peter Bruce, writing in the Sunday Times, put it well. He said, the South African government has become a manufacturer of policy uncertainty. You never know what policies will look like in 3 months or even 10 years. You don't know what political leadership will be in charge and what they will stand for. If you're going to invest money in this country, it's at least a 10-year vision that you've got to have. You've got to know what the rules of the game are going to be. You can't have a different political party coming in 5 years and changing it all negatively, coming in with an anti-business, anti-investment slant. We've got to have consistent, proper leadership, and we're not providing that at the moment. You would have seen that picture. But as the Business Day said, the problem with Malema's provocative approach to politics is it draws out the worst in our society on both sides, and they go at each other on social media, and it upsets all of us because, as they say here, the vast majority of South Africans live in that center ground. Less than 5% of South Africans are actually on platforms like Twitter. Don't let it work here, because there's still going to be a lot of noise before elections next year. Elections in May, June, try to avoid it. Travel, go on a road trip. Whatever you like doing, just do it. Read a book. Okay, in summary then, globally, it's going to be a much better picture going forward than going backwards. Inflation has peaked. Interest rates are going to start declining probably middle of next year. The minute markets sense that, you're going to get a softer dollar, risk on. They're going to start coming back to emerging markets. Emerging markets like South Africa, back in vogue, everything feels better. That translates through to South Africa. Expect ongoing, but less load shedding, as I said to you, particularly in a year's time. Inflation is under control. That's good news. Our interest rates down first quarter of next year. This future environmental benefit flows into this country. It'll help the rand. It'll help with sentiment. Transit and Eskom set to improve in the next 2 to 3 years. Because of partial privatization, working with business. So the next 18 months, looking a lot better than the past. So let me leave you with a comment from one of the top analysts in the industry, Will Ridge from Investec. And this is worth remembering before you get depressed. Politicians will come and go. The strength of institutions is crucial. As I said to you, free press, judiciary. Free press keeps the system clean. We owe them huge gratitude. We survived the Gupta Zuma years. We cannot get worse. We've actually made progress as a country since then. Corruption is called out by brave journalists. Do not underestimate how risky it is for journalists to do what they're doing. The wheels of justice turn, albeit slowly. Corporate South Africa has dealt with worse before. It's all but very frustrating. But that doesn't mean that you are not allowed to be frustrated, irritated, and at times even scared about what is going on in this country. But this next statement is the most frustrating thing, but it's also what gives me hope. If we just got a few things right, this is not rocket science. Just get a few things right and stop scoring own goals. Simple as that. The lives of millions of South Africans could be uplifted quite quickly. And as I say, that is the most frustrating thing, but it's also what gives me hope. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Anyone going to Paris, I hope you wind up watching us in the final, because I think we need some good news at this stage.